Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. As we're all still coming down from our Oscar high, Ellen DeGeneres can stay up there a little bit longer as she's still making headlines this morning about the amazing ratings she was able to pull in for the telecast. They went up even a little higher than what was announced yesterday. I think they ended up, it says here, around 43.7 million. That's how many people she brought in, which it turns out is the highest number of people to tune in for the show since 2000, when Billy Crystal hosted and American Beauty was the top winner. Now, the interesting thing is, not to take away from her achievement, I think it really is commendable. I know a number of people in the press have had somewhat of a problem with her hosting, feeling it wasn't quite up to par. I thought it was hit or miss, but a lot of big hits, which was very strong, as I discussed yesterday. But once again, you have a situation where Hollywood and the press are at odds with the general viewing public, who loved Ellen, and as you can see, went in wanting to love her and excited that she was going to host because she was able to bring in this number of people. I've seen some people say they'd be curious to know what the dropout rate was because the show dragged and wasn't particularly plotted very well. But I don't, Hollywood and television usually doesn't discuss that kind of those kind of numbers. But the other thing I wanted to point out was that we're talking about very small differences here. The Billy Crystal Oscars were 46.53 million back in 2000, and then Ellen was at 43.7. But then poor Seth MacFarlane, who everybody is just really taking a lot of glee and ragging on. And as I said yesterday, I thought he was a very good host. I think in some ways better than Ellen, in my personal opinion. We Saw Your Boobs was totally a correct song. He wasn't making it up. It actually did happen. And I applaud him for calling that out because I feel that's a cheap trick to win an Oscar often. I guess someone should sing a song maybe next year about weight loss. But again, it's all in good fun. I know some of you will be like, hey, that's a legitimate form of acting, I guess. But Seth MacFarlane had, let's see here, what did he have? He had around about 40 million for his host. So it's all in the 40 million range. So they're really splitting hairs to some degree for the headlines. But I guess that's the name of the game, obviously. But Seth MacFarlane, it's not like he brought in a really ridiculously low number. He was within reason. So that's the first. That's not even a story today. I just wanted to tell you guys about that. All right. So let's go on to the stories. I'm catching up. Luckily for me, nothing's really happening in Hollywood so far this week. Everyone's still coming off their Oscar high, so I can catch up on some of the stories I missed while I was on vacation. So I asked you, what do you want to see me cover? And by far and away, the biggest one was the Fantastic Four casting. And sure enough, I was like, why do they keep making these announcements when I'm out of town? Lex Luthor obviously was, as you might recall, was announced while I was away for my grandmother's 90th birthday. And I never go on vacation. So anyway, just February was a rough month. You would think nothing would happen in February. But anyway, they announced this Fantastic Four casting, and let's talk about it. Because I think it's very interesting, and I think that Fox tried to do something with diversity here, and I think it could end up potentially backfiring on them a little bit. All right, so the casting, what is it? A lot of it, the rumors were true to the degree that Miles Teller is Mr. Fantastic. Very interesting choice in that casting alone. There's nothing controversial about it, but Miles Teller is a very extroverted individual, and it's something also he specializes in as an actor, portraying an extroverted personality, whereas Reed Richards is very introverted, to the point where that's why he needs Sue Storm to kind of bring him out of his shell. So I don't know if Miles Teller is going to try and show some range, or if maybe they've come up with kind of a more fast-talking, somewhat humorous leader for the Fantastic Four. I get, more like, George Clooney, Ocean's 11 vibes from Miles Teller. That's just because it comes to me off the top of my head. I don't really see him. And ironically, I thought George Clooney, a couple of years ago would have made a fantastic Reed Richards. Maybe even today to some degree. But he's moved on. He's making Tomorrowland with Brad Bird and Damon Lindelof, which I'm very excited about. Which might be the premier sci-fi movie anyway, despite Fantastic Four. I mean, they're both kind of similar when you think about it. Well, as far as we know, Tomorrowland is kept under tight wraps. So Miles Teller, I predict maybe some changes for the character personality-wise if he's been cast. Because why would you cast Miles Teller? He's all about his personality. He's, I do feel very John Cusack-y. Then for Michael B. Jordan will be playing Johnny Storm, as has been rumored for a very long time. And it's really great to see him in this role. I think it's very iconic. I think that, we've discussed this a couple of times before on the show when it was just a rumor. And, of course, he's reuniting with his Chronicle director, Josh Trank. And I think it's really nice to get some more diversity in lead roles in these superhero movies for once. And I think it's a step in the right direction. Whether or not you should change a big character, or you should maybe, for instance, everyone keeps saying, where's that Black Panther movie? There are characters that exist, Luke Cage. There are diverse characters that exist on the comic book page already that you don't need to do, a race switch, with the color of the skin. But I think that Michael B. Jordan is a very talented actor. He has a very strong fan base already, and I think people will be curious to see what he does with the role. And also, as I discussed with this before, Johnny Storm. Chris Evans already kind of did the more traditional Johnny Storm, the jokey guy, who likes to be a playboy. They've already done that with him. And I don't really think it took very well, obviously, because, Chris Evans is no longer playing that role. He's moved over to the actual, the legitimate Marvel Cinematic Universe as Captain America. So Johnny Storm just didn't work yet. So instead of rehashing that, I can see some reasoning there. I can understand the reasoning of trying to do something a little different with the character and re-energize him and interest in him by doing this change, by casting Michael B. Jordan. Now that leads, though, to the big problem where I think this could potentially blow up in Fox's face. And we'll get to that in a moment, because that's really, I think, the big discussion here. But let's move over, I think, first to Jamie Bell, who has been cast as Ben Grimm. There were some rumors they were going to try and go with like a male model type actor for the role. I'm glad they didn't. And I think by choosing Jamie Bell, it probably shows they will use motion capture for the Ben Grimm, when he turns into the Thing scenes. Because also remember, Jamie Bell has experience with that from Tintin, where he played Tintin, via motion capture. So he's already, worn the suit. He knows how to act in that environment. I would counter, though, that I think he didn't do a particularly good job with Tintin. I mean, I know it's more of a straight character. There's not a lot of room for flamboyance, like Andy Serkis. But I don't think anybody was like, wow, it's not like Zoe Saldana even with Avatar. I don't think anybody was like, whoa, who's controlling Tintin? He's amazingly good. People are just like, this movie could have been live action. That's kind of how I felt about Tintin. So anyway, Jamie Bell will be playing Ben Grimm, the Thing. And I do like Jamie Bell a lot. I think he should be commended for being able to stay in the Hollywood game after being Billy Elliot all those years ago, and really sticking with it, creating a persona, not letting that original role, color him for the rest of his career for the rest of his life. And he's choosing interesting roles. Has he found that great breakout role yet? No, he hasn't. But maybe this will be it. Now, let's get to Sue Storm. This is where I think there are some problems. No offense to Kate Mara. I think it's interesting. She's Rooney Mara's sister. They are from a very wealthy family. They own the Giants and the Steelers, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Extremely wealthy family. Both their daughters decided to go, the Rooneys and the Maras, actually. That's where Rooney Mara gets her name from. That's the Rooneys own the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so both their daughters are in Hollywood. Kate Mara was there first, but of course Rooney Mara got a lot more attention because she went and she did obviously the Girl with the Dragon tattoo, which got a lot of attention for her. So everybody knew who Rooney Mara really was first in the general public, even though Kate Mara, was on Entourage, etc. But then of course Kate Mara got on House of Cards, and I think also being Rooney Mara's sister, she's really, I think, been angling to try and catch up to Rooney, her sister. So I think to some degree she has with the Sue Storm role. However, I really think it's a mistake that Sue Storm is also not a black actress, because Johnny Storm and Sue Storm are siblings. They're brother and sister. And I know people have been saying, even when it was a rumor that Michael B. Jordan would be playing Johnny Storm, that they could be half brother and sister, or one of them is adopted. And you could totally do that. But I think that one of the things that worked so much about the Fantastic Four was that visual family connection between Johnny and Sue. Both, white with blonde hair, blue eyes. They really stood out as a duo. And I think that because the Fantastic Four as a character group is about family. They really are a family. And I think that's always been like the main through line to all the Fantastic Four stories. They're one of the few comic book characters to have children and really continue. Those kids are never retconned. They're never sent away. They never, meet a tragic end. They're never given up. Like, of course, Catwoman, for instance, had a child and gave the child away because it was too dangerous to be Catwoman's daughter. But, instead they start the Future Foundation over in the Fantastic Four, and they really focus on what it means to be a family and, both traditional and non-traditional. So family is a huge through line here. So I think there could have been a great opportunity to play that up in a different way. Just as it's exciting to play up with Johnny Storm by casting Michael B. Jordan, I don't see why you can't have that same excitement with casting a black actress to play Sue Storm. And I think it would have really driven home that you have a brother and sister thrust into this situation together and they need to lean on each other. I mean, of course, there's the romance between Sue Storm and Reed Richards, one of the first and most famous couples in comics, who actually to some degree have never really found identities beyond their relationship. But still, I think this was a great opportunity to refocus on the Johnny and Sue, brother and sisterhood. Now, the other reason I bring this up is that, I talked about this a little yesterday with Lupita Nyong'o's win, and that, Viola Davis, when she was nominated for The Help, said, well, Hattie McDaniel was won the first Oscar for a black actor or actress for playing a maid in Gone with the Wind. And now here we are, like 100 years later or so, and I'm being nominated for also still playing a maid. And it really spoke to the lack of roles that are available for black actresses. They tend to be, the help or a teacher or a government official. They're rarely in these really exciting lead roles. And then I said Lupita Nyong'o, didn't win for playing a maid, but for playing a slave, which I don't really think you could argue is a step forward. I mean, at least it's something different, but it's not that diversity I think that we would like to see for all actors and all, of all race and gender. Now, the other thing is that there aren't, for that reason, you see very few successful black actresses in all different areas of entertainment. For instance, SNL just had to go through this huge problem with not having any black female comedians on the show. And they cast one after, they made fun of it themselves in a very good Kerry Washington episode. I'll get to Kerry Washington in a minute. That was a great episode. If you missed it, you should watch it. It's very funny. But they cast someone, and they haven't really given her anything to do the last few episodes that I've seen, at least. She's actually just does, believe it or not, she's a backup singer in the SNL digital shorts from their musical. And that's like, really? It's really shocking that they made all this effort to try and to fix a problem, and then they just kind of presented a different kind of problem. So you have that situation. And because of all that, you don't have a lot of really successful black actresses working in Hollywood. Kerry Washington, as I just noted, she's on Scandal. She's been working pretty well, but I think Scandal is what really made her start to become a name talent with the mainstream. So kudos to her. So Kerry Washington. Tika Sumpter is getting some roles. I think that's encouraging. Some people mentioned Gabrielle Union, but I would have to say I think Gabrielle Union's, she still, of course, has a solid career, but she's really not an up-and-comer anymore. I think her window of opportunity might have passed to some degree. So you have Kerry Washington, Tika Sumpter. I forget the actress's name, actually, but she's on the Disney Channel a lot. I believe on Ant Farm. I've seen, my sister is a big fan of the Disney Channel shows, and sometimes we turn them on, and I've seen she does a very nice job. But, and of course there's Halle Berry, but Halle Berry, has been kind of in a category by herself. And even she, I think, has had trouble finding roles. And then there's Zoe Saldana, some people might argue, but I think Zoe Saldana, if you were to ask her, would consider herself more of a Latina actress. I'm not sure. But still, you can see there's not a lot to draw from it because there's not a lot to go around. I'm talking, of course, there are a lot of very, revered black actresses who are older, but I'm talking again about up-and-coming talent. So that's how I feel about this Fantastic Four casting. I feel that it was almost interesting, almost perfect, and now I think that because they're kind of, only half doing it, I think that it's going to people are going to watch the movie and be like, if you were going to do this, why isn't Sue Storm black as well? And it's just people are going to be like, so what's the relationship between Johnny and Sue? What? And they're going to have to take a long time establishing it instead of being very easily been able to go, hey, guess what? Here's a brother and sister, we're done, let's move on. And I think that in terms of an interracial romance between Sue and Reed, I mean, come on, really, it's 2014. There are tons of interracial couples all over the globe. I really don't think that's an issue anymore. Even, I've been, even when I travel in Middle America, there's tons of interracial couples. This is not a problem, even where maybe in only the smallest places. And I think where it is a problem, they don't really go into probably to see the movies anyway, and probably wouldn't be going to see Fantastic Four. And so instead of, I think, Fantastic Four being on the cutting edge and maybe doing something really interesting, it just comes across as a PR stunt and, a hollow gesture. And so I feel bad that Michael B. Jordan is potentially caught up in all of that. All right, so that's the first story of the day. And I'm very curious how you guys feel about it. I know you've probably discussed it before. I'm a little late to the party on this one because I was away, but please write down below your thoughts on the Fantastic Four casting. All right, the other big news, it's still in rumor stage, but everyone's saying, oh, it's the kind of rumor that Michael B. Jordan was for Johnny Storm. And that's that Adam Driver will, he's been rumored to be in a lot of different big movies, but he finally got one. It looks like he's going to be in Star Wars as the villain. Very interesting. I think Adam Driver is extremely charismatic. I've mentioned this before. Some people like him, some people don't. I think if you like him, you really like him, you're like, what a great talent. I think he has a very interesting track record. Obviously was in the military after 9/11, then went to Juilliard. You should look up some of his interviews online. He's charismatic, charming, and just offbeat enough to be interesting without off-putting, which I think is great. But if you don't like Adam Driver, I don't think anyone dislikes Adam Driver, but I think you might be like, I just don't get it. I think you'll get it after Star Wars. I think they're very lucky to cast him in the role. If he's going to play a villain, it's probably obviously going to have to be a villain that you're supposed to kind of like. Maybe, like Anakin Skywalker. Hayden Christensen obviously had a great opportunity with that role, but really failed to make anything of it. We'll never know if it was his fault or George Lucas's, but he just never really was. Everyone knows who Hayden Christensen is to some degree, but then of course he never really was able to work again. Adam Driver, everybody, he's on the top list of everybody. I think it's most interesting that he didn't end up in a Warner Brothers picture. Warner Brothers really wanted this guy. He's doing some other films for them. They've been very impressed with the footage they've seen. They were trying to find something for him in their DC Cinematic Universe, but it just didn't pan out. The rumor now was that he was actually up instead for Nightwing, it was for Lex Luthor. I don't think he would have been a great Lex Luthor, actually. I think Jesse Eisenberg was the better choice there. I think Adam Driver is a little... I think that he's too much like Henry Cavill. I think there's a little too many similarities to really make that for a good matchup. But I think that as a Sith Lord, I'm assuming, or something like that, I think Adam Driver could be quite compelling. I think he's very good at emotional work, and I think he could really do something with the role. Here's hoping, though, that this isn't another situation where JJ Abrams takes a fan favorite like Benedict Cumberbatch, puts them in a lead villain role, and then ends up throwing them under the bus by shortchanging them in terms of story development, character development, and just really ends up being a non-entity, where they're just there for their fandom. I was very disappointed on how Benedict Cumberbatch's role as Khan turned out, and again, it was that fake surprise. Is he Khan? Is he not Khan? Oh, he's Khan! Everybody saw it coming, so I think that I hope JJ Abrams doesn't kind of handicap Adam Driver's big screen chances the way I think he has to some degree Benedict Cumberbatch. All right, so that's my thoughts on that news. I'm very curious to see how the rest of that cast rounds out. Jesse Plemons, I'm wondering if he's still in the mix. I think an Adam Driver, Jesse Plemons movie could be really interesting. I mean, you're talking about some really good talent there. And two actors, Jesse Plemons, of course, from Breaking Bad is Todd, and then Adam Driver from Girls, as Adam, I think, right? That's correct. I can't believe I don't know. I watched that. I like that show. I think it's pretty strong. It's catching up. It had some weak episodes this season, but I think it's got the grandmother one from this week was very well done. But I think that both actors have really stolen the show on their respective television shows and really made an impact with fans. And I think it would be great to see them get a chance to step front and center. But just actually now that I think about it, the idea of an Adam Driver versus Jesse Plemons matchup would be fascinating. There's some rumor that it might be Jack Rayner from Transformers 4, but I think Jesse Plemons would be so much more interesting. And I think it's also interesting that you would have a situation where you didn't cast any Hollywood, typical pretty boy actors, which the original Star Wars didn't either. I guess Mark Hamill to some degree could have been considered your typical pretty boy, but going for male actors who are very charismatic. Very exciting. JJ Abrams, if that's the casting, I think he's really nailed it. All right, so the third story I wanted to talk about today actually materialized over the weekend, and that's Nonstop. I really loved this movie. I gave it a great review. I said it's one of the closest movies. I think it's the movie I've seen get closest to Die Hard yet. I was really surprised at how good it was, and the whole movie I was like, wow, this movie is surprisingly good. I just couldn't believe it, and it never deviated from being awesome. But then when I posted my review, I was really surprised to see a number of people say, hey, you might not be aware of this, but in some communities, it's getting out who the actual hijacker is. And some people find it very offensive, and some people are actually boycotting the movie because of that. People ask me for my opinion, and I stated it in the comments, but I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on it more here. So this is a spoiler. If you have not seen Nonstop, skip to the viewer question. All right, I'm giving you a countdown from 5. Skip to the Nonstop, skip to the next question right now. I'm going to spoil Nonstop for you, all right? 5, 4, 3, 2, spoiler! All right, as it was revealed at the end of the movie, there were actually 2 hijackers. One was Scoot McNairy and one was Nate Parker. Very well done. Of course, you suspected everybody on the plane, but they had actually, both of those actors, their characters had seemed to acquit themselves, but then they turned out to be evil after all. But the big twist was they were actually former military personnel, and they had fought after Scoot McNairy's character had died in 9/11, and that's why he joined the military, and he felt that, and then he said, I was fighting a war I didn't understand. It was very political reasoning as to what happened, why the character did what he did and hijacked this plane. And some people said that, with all that the military does, to have them be the villain was really an offensive and inappropriate choice by the film. And of course, I would also like to point out this is a half foreign film, half produced in the United States, but also France, and that's somewhat I can see the European influence there a little bit, the global influence. But as I said in the comments, I think it's a mistake to think that any group is without the potential for a flaw. No group is perfect, and I think that to write off the entire military as flawless, or any group, is not a good idea. I think that, and we've seen some military members, this is, of course, the vast minority, make mistakes, flip out. I mean, look what happened at Abu Ghraib. I 100% don't think that what happened with those soldiers did there speaks for the rest of the armed forces. And of course, you hear these horrible accusations sometimes of rape at these, American bases abroad. And of course, I think some people would argue what Edward Snowden did, working for the government and then using that position to reveal state secrets that he felt needed to be revealed. I mean, you never really know where someone's coming from, and I think Snowden actually is a great example of, some people think what he did was horrible, and some people think he's a hero. And so some people watching nonstop would think, oh, it's so despicable that these characters, these military personnel, would turn on their own country. But then I think definitely there are some people who would say, oh, I can see where they're coming from. Some soldiers do question the war. And I think you're heading into a very gray area. And I think that it was depicted that way. I mean, Liam Neeson's character was a former police officer. Corey Stoll's character in the film was a police officer. And they expressed surprise that these people could turn on their own country and go from military personnel. I mean, it was addressed. How far these two men had fallen. And so I think that's important. You should also remember that any group finds it offensive when they are depicted as the villains. I thought, when I saw the recent Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, I thought it was very offensive towards Russia when it made them out to still be a global problem and a threat, and just thugs. I think whenever, for instance, you see lawyers vilified, or I'm sure whenever anyone on Wall Street who's trying very hard to do a great job and help people make money for retirement, they go see The Wolf of Wall Street and they're like, I don't like the way Wall Street's depicted. Feminists, obviously, it's very important to me how women are portrayed, and I think that's something I feel very strongly about, obviously, from this show. But a lot of times, feminists are portrayed as incompetent, the butt of jokes. And I imagine as upset as I am about how Sandra Bullock was portrayed in Gravity, is how upset some people are upset about how these military personnel are portrayed in Nonstop. And I think you just, I don't want to discredit your anger or your feelings about that, because obviously I was upset. But I think you just have to understand that it was not meant to say anything bad about the entire military. It was just a motive created for these characters. It speaks to a small faction of the military that I think, probably, could flip and has flipped. I think, and I want to underline this comment. I'm sorry about it. This is a very sensitive situation, but I also just want to underline that for you in any scenario, never assume that just because someone has on a badge or a uniform or is an authority figure, that person is flawless, that person will make no mistakes, that person will never do you harm. Everyone is an individual and should be judged so and have the chance to prove themselves. And just like that, I think on the same wavelength, every individual can disappoint and prove themselves maybe unworthy of the group that they've joined. So I still think you shouldn't let that detract from your enjoyment of the film. 100% being honest, is it a good idea to add maybe a political element to the movie? I don't know. I think, as you can see, it had this bit of a backlash. But I think at the same time, you're dealing with Homeland Security, which was why U.S. Marshals, federal marshals fly on these airlines. It is related to 9/11, so I think that it is organic to the story that was being told. All right, so after that extremely awkward conversation, sorry about that, I hope you understand what I was trying to say, let's get on to the viewer question of the day, which is from Black Masamoon X. And Black Masamoon X says, "Hey Grace, how long do you think it will be when we will look at today's movie special effects as poorly done as the ones we do for movies just 50 years ago?" Interesting question. I don't know. I guess, even I was talking about my problems with the Godzilla trailer too, about the way the Statue of Liberty looked. And by the way, I just want to say, a number of people were like, "Grace, that's not the real Statue of Liberty. That's the Statue of Liberty in Las Vegas." And as I pointed out in the comments, my problem wasn't that it didn't look like the Statue of Liberty, is that it didn't look like a statue. It didn't look real. It didn't look like a thing. It looked like a drawing, stuck into the frame. It just didn't. I didn't buy it as any actual physical object on the screen. So I think that's when special effects, they look bad now. But as far as also to your question, it reminds me of when I was. I don't know if this is quite so much the case still, but when I was going to look at televisions, they were playing Blu-ray, and they were playing Pirates of the Caribbean, and I still remember this. I think Pirates of the Caribbean, the one with the giant squid. I think it might have been two or three. No, I think it was two. No, maybe it was three. I don't know. They all run together. But when you watched it in Blu-ray, it was really obvious what was a special effect and what was actually shot on set in camera. And it just looked absolutely ridiculous. They had this giant squid grabbing all these pirates, and the pirates clearly were just flying through the air with like this very clearly digital squid arm wrapped around them, and you could just pretty much tell, what had been drawn in, and it almost was like, real life in like a crayon. That's how bad the render looked with the Blu-ray, because the Blu-ray picture is so clear. So I think that's where you're going to see problems, perhaps. But I think like special effects done in camera, like Edgar Wright, by the way, is really fantastic with the work that he does in camera. The special effects on The World's End are really well done, and most of them were done in camera. And also, he said he built that off of Attack the Block special effects that he did when that film was made. He produced that film, I believe. And those special effects. And those special effects are so well done that I think that they will always look good to you. You will always, I think, no matter, and that's when special effects, they stick out when they're still being worked on. So I think the Blu-ray stuff is already looking bad now, but I think these in-camera special effects from Edgar Wright will always look good. They'll always look phenomenal because they're just very simply and smartly well done. And I don't think we're ever going to go back and look at Star Wars or Indiana Jones. I mean, you can look at those films today and they still look really good. And I don't really know how much further special effects can go. As to your question, I think we might be there. I think what's going to evolve going forward is the movie-going experience. What the kind of theater you're in, how we watch movies, how we watch them together. I think that's the next frontier in big screen entertainment. Because I think movies have a big problem in that I think their audience is shifting to their home because of problems at the theaters. I think there's nothing, you could argue quality to some degree. We'll get into that. I think someone asked a similar question that I'm going to answer later this week. But as for special effects, I think we're pretty much there. I don't know how much better that they could really get. We might get to a situation where you have, we might be able to cross that uncanny valley in terms of how characters look. And actually, this gives me an opportunity to bring up something I wasn't sure where I was going to fit it in, but here we go. I want to touch on this thing that they have this new trend of animating dead actors in commercials. Now, they've done it for a while now in this Dior commercial. You might have seen it where Charlize Theron is going to a fashion show at Versailles, and she comes in and backstage is Grace Kelly and Marilyn Monroe, and she gives them a hug, and they're like, "Oh, we're all blondes and we all love Dior." And that it's very quickly done, and you can kind of tell that they're, to some degree, taking, those actresses' faces. And the Grace Kelly one looks better than the Marilyn Monroe one. But, they're taking like old footage and kind of blending it in and tweaking it. But I saw a really offensive one the other day. It's right up there, I guess, with that, when Fred Astaire with the vacuum commercial that a lot of people were like, "What is this?" But they are using Audrey Hepburn to advertise Dove chocolate. And they show her on a bus in Italy, and it's all new footage except for Audrey Hepburn. And she doesn't look quite real, but she looks pretty good though. I mean, it is better than I've seen yet. And I think in the close-ups, obviously, where you don't see her full face, it's a stand-in. But I don't know how they did it. I don't know if it's an animated, like an animation of Audrey Hepburn that they can do anything they want, or if they've kind of, again, manipulated old footage from other movies. But I think it's creepy. I think that to resurrect talent again, after they've passed to sell a product. And especially when Audrey Hepburn, to my knowledge, wasn't really doing a lot of commercials. I mean, I guess, Marilyn Monroe famously for Chanel No. 5 was, did a lot of commercials, so I guess maybe that would make more sense. But I think Audrey Hepburn had a little more integrity than that. So to kind of just pimp her out now that she has no say in the matter, and then you can reanimate her, all I can say is I hope that her estate the money goes to some kind of charity. I know, for instance, every time you see Marilyn Monroe in anything, that money goes actually at least partially to an orphanage. She left, in her will, she left her fortune and her estate to an orphanage because she wasn't able to have children herself. So I think that would be, at least make it somewhat okay. But that maybe is the next frontier, Black Miss X, where we can maybe take an actor who's passed away and reanimate them into a film. There were some rumors they're going to try and do that with Philip Seymour Hoffman, maybe for Mockingjay. I just think you should let the deceased rest in peace, even on a movie screen. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's 3 top stories, the viewer question, the Oscars, by the way, with those numbers and splitting hairs in terms of viewership, if you think that Ellen's justified to get these headlines, or do you think Seth MacFarlane is getting a bum rap? And anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.